Get ready, because today we're diving into a mystery, a real bone chiller, centered around a guy dubbed the Werewolf of Allariz.
Yeah, the case of Manuel Blanco Romasanta.
A name that just sends shivers down your spine, you know?
It's one of those stories that sticks with you, and to really understand it, we got to go back to 19th century Spain.
Set the scene for us.
Picture it. Rural Galicia, poverty everywhere, superstition running rampant, basically a breeding ground for folklore and fear.
So, before we get to the gruesome stuff, who was Romasanta before he earned that werewolf title?
On the surface, totally average dude, he was a buchonero,
A what?
a traveling salesman, basically. Imagine him blending into the countryside, going village to village, peddling his wares.
So not exactly someone you'd expect to have a nickname like the Werewolf.
Right, but here's the thing, people actually liked him. They described him as charming, helpful, even played the church bell on Sundays.
So not exactly setting off alarm bells then.
Not at all. And that's how he lured people in, especially women desperate for work. They trusted him, which is just, well, it's where the disappearances start.
Disappearances.
Women and children, mostly.
Yeah.
They'd vanish, gone without a trace.
And Romasanta? He was involved somehow.
Oh, he was involved, all right. He'd approach these women, offering them jobs, a chance for a better life, something they couldn't resist.
Like a predator preying on the vulnerable.
Exactly. And get this, he'd even send letters back to their families.
Letters from the missing people.
Yep. But they were fakes. Carefully crafted to reassure the families, throw them off the scent. It's chilling how calculated it all was.
Okay, so we've got a charming con man preying on the vulnerable, but something must have happened in his past, right? Some clue that hinted at this darkness.
Well, there is one peculiar detail about his birth. While born male, a clerical error initially listed him as female. It was corrected, of course, but it was a point of debate, even back then.
You think that could have had an effect on him psychologically?
It's hard to say for sure, but it adds another layer to an already complex individual, wouldn't you say?
It definitely does. So, we have a web of intrigue already, a seemingly normal man, yet shrouded in strange circumstances, and preying on the vulnerable with calculated deception.
And believe me, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The trial itself, that's where things get really bizarre.
It's scary how easily he could fool people, especially with all that charm. But I guess eventually the truth comes out, right? So how was he finally caught?
1852. Romasanta was apprehended. They found him with belongings from several missing people.
Busted. What was the reaction like?
Oh, you can imagine. The story spread like wildfire. Whispers, accusations. The villages were terrified.
It must have been the talk of the town, especially with the trial coming up.
It was a huge deal. The trial went on for months. Everyone was glued to the news.
Why so long? It seems pretty open and shut they caught him red-handed.
Oh, if only it were that simple. It became this whole tangled mess of disturbing facts and even more disturbing claims.
Okay, enough suspense. Spill the tea. What was his defense?
You're not going to believe this.
Yeah.
Ready for it. Romasanta confesses.
To the murders.
To the murders. But he claims he was cursed.
Cursed? By who? A vengeful spirit?
A witch, he said. She cursed him to turn into a werewolf.
Wait, seriously? He's going with the werewolf defense. Did that actually work back then?
That's the big question, isn't it? Was it a real delusion? Or just a desperate attempt to avoid the death penalty? Or, and this is where it gets really interesting, maybe it was something else altogether.
Something else.
Remember that whole birth certificate thing, being labeled female at birth? Back then, doctors were just starting to understand things like monomania.
Monomania.
Basically, it's like having a single obsession that consumes your every thought, twists your view of reality.
So maybe that's what was going on with Romasanta.
It's possible. It definitely fascinated people at the time.
Yeah.
But even with a confession, there's still the issue of the bodies.
Right, you need those to convict, right?
Yeah, you'd think so. But here's the catch. Romasanta led authorities to several supposed burial sites. They never found any remains, no physical evidence, just his word, and a whole lot of fear and suspicion.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got a confession, but no bodies, a werewolf defense, and a possible undiagnosed mental illness. No wonder this story became legendary.
Right. And you have to remember, this was rural Spain. Belief in the supernatural was practically a given. People grew up on stories of witches, werewolves, all that spooky stuff.
So those disappearances, coupled with those old legends, it's a recipe for some serious fear-mongering.
Exactly. Then there were rumors about things like the Sacramentecas.
Sacramentecas. Now that sounds like something straight out of a horror story. What is it?
Basically, this mythical figure who extracts human fat
For what? Like some kind of ritual?
Supposedly it had medicinal properties.
You're kidding.
I'm not. People actually believe that. And here's where it gets even creepier. There are records of apothecaries from that time actually selling human fat as a cure-all.
No way. And Romasanta, being a traveling salesman, he would have known about this, right?
Exactly. He had access to those markets. So it makes you wonder, was he killing for profit? Was there something more sinister going on?
So many possibilities. Was he a cold-blooded killer using superstition as a smokescreen? Was he mentally ill? Or some terrifying combination of the two? It's like a puzzle where half the pieces are missing.
And just when you think you might be close to figuring it all out, the case takes another turn. Enter a French physician named Dr. Phillips.
A French physician. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What did this Dr. Phillips make of the whole werewolf thing and the rumors about Romasanta being Sacamantecas?
Well, Dr. Phillips, he was a fascinating guy in his own right. He'd heard about the case, obviously, and became convinced that Romasanta wasn't some kind of monster. He thought he was sick, suffering from something that could maybe even be treated.
So, not a werewolf then. What was his diagnosis?
Dr. Phillips, he was really into some pretty cutting-edge stuff for the time. He thought it could be monomania. Remember we talked about that earlier?
Yeah, the whole being obsessed with one idea thing.
Right, like it warps your whole reality. Or, and get this, he thought maybe hypnosis might help.
Hypnosis? That wasn't exactly mainstream medicine back then, was it?
Definitely not. It was super experimental.
Yeah.
But somehow, Dr. Phillips's theories, they caught the attention of someone very important. Queen Isabel II herself.
Whoa, hold on. The Queen of Spain.
Yep. She had this thing about science and medicine, so this case, with the brutality and the potential mental illness angle, it really piqued her interest.
So we've gone from traveling salesman to werewolf to royal intervention. You couldn't make this stuff up.
And it's here where you see how those in power grappled with these new ideas about mental illness. See, the Queen, she was fascinated by Dr. Phillips' theories, and maybe even felt some compassion for Romasanta. She actually commuted his death sentence, changed it to life in prison instead.
Really? That's pretty progressive for that time period.
It was. She wanted Romasanta to be studied, to see if maybe there was a way to help him. But, and it's a sad twist, Romasanta was sent to this remote prison in Ceuta, basically forgotten. Whatever chance he had at treatment, it's separating fact from fiction in his own mind. It died with him in that cell.
So he died in 1863, still a mystery. Did he ever admit that the werewolf thing was a lie?
We'll never know for sure, will we? What was going on in his mind? Was he manipulating everyone, using superstition to escape the consequences? Was he truly ill? Or was it something in between, a mix of both?
It's incredible how a story from so long ago can still fascinate us like this.
It really shows the power of a good mystery. And it makes you think how many other so-called monsters throughout history were just misunderstood, maybe even victims themselves.
It's a chilling thought. Romasanta's story is definitely one that'll stay with me. It reminds us that the line between man and monster, sanity and insanity, it's not always so clear. What stands out to you? What will you be thinking about after this? For me, it's the possibility that sometimes the most terrifying acts are committed by those who are also victims in their own way. Until next time, keep asking questions, and remember, sometimes the most frightening monsters are the ones we create.